my any comments.
Welcome, Scott Taylor. So we are here on the Monday morning data chat today. I'm Matt Housley. Joe Reese is not with us today, who's going to try to make it. And he got to Bangkok last night, and he told me this morning, like, yeah, I'm super jet lagged, and I'm not going to be on. So.
I told him, I warned him. I was like, Joe, you're not going to make your own show. No, I'll make it. But Matt, great to be with you on here, and we'll take it from there. So always happy to be on the Monday morning data chat.
Well, we've turned this into a February tradition. It's not technically Valentine's Day this time, but close enough, right?
It's Valentine's Day Eve.
There you go. Yeah,
roses are never more expensive than today. So,
and they're not good roses either. My sister is a florist, and like this is kind of D-Day for the 14th is D-Day for her, and you get the best flowers you can, but everything gets sold out, just completely wiped out.
Yeah. I'll tell you, everybody out there, they still work on the 15th. If you buy your partner some roses, they're still good on the 15th, and you'll never get a better deal. But anyway, oh, and here's my part right here. She's live. The Data Whisperer decided to make a cameo appearance.
And he gets me roses every week. So if you really want to make a point on Valentine's Day, be consistent.
Be consistent.
This is fantastic. Okay, I'm learning some lessons.
Thank you, dear. All right, honey.
So you're also on a sort of vacation right now, I understand. Is that correct?
I am. I'm on like a semi-vacation, like a 6-week stint where we're Airbnb snowbird nomads from New England. We're in Florida, hence the get up here. But that was also the promo picture for the show, so I thought I would deliver on the imagery that you guys marketed. We're in Florida. We were in Cocoa Beach for a couple of weeks, which was fantastic. We just got back from a cruise. And now we're in Delray Beach, and then we're going to the west side in a week or so, and then heading back up north. But we missed sub-zero temperatures in our apartment building back in Connecticut. So one objective was definitely met, which was to skip all that stuff.
Well, even so, you've taken the time to join us today. I think from our discussion earlier, even though you're on vacation, you still have a few things on your mind that are
still a few things
on
my yes, still in the game, still checking LinkedIn, still trying to do the right recordings, working with you. Got a couple of client calls, a blog I have to write next week, but hey, from my perspective, I'm living my dream, so I'm totally happy that this is actually technically working while I'm wherever I'm at.
So, yeah, this sounds like the way to do it. I've never vacationed in Florida, but I aspire to emulate you.
It's beautiful. We're having a ball here. So, and I try to dress the part, as you can see.
Yeah, it's working. So yeah, what's on your mind these days? What's
the same stuff we're always hearing? We're hearing a lot about the stories that people are telling, the data mesh and data fabric and modern data stack and all these newish kinds of things that are coming up. And for me, my usual stab at staying relevant is to hear the descriptions or the context around these big ideas and find the place where it's noted that, you know what, none of it works unless your data is any good. And that's, as you know, that's my point. That's what I feel part of my purpose in the data community is just continually to be reminding people of some version of GIGO is at play in anything that has to do with technology, wrapping that around the fact that we spend a lot of time in this community and the broader technological community coming up with language that will describe our newest, coolest thing that doesn't necessarily resonate with the business side, who is the reason we exist. That's the reason we do stuff for data. I mean, the way I kind of feel about it is, and then there's all these arguments and debates between, one faction and another faction of what do we mean by this? And, data contracts was a term that came up recently for me in a discussion. It was like a contract is a word that the business understands as an agreement between parties then somebody was describing data contracts as actually more of a technology oriented approach to connect things. I guess the connection part's in there. And they lost me on it because they said it was like a data contract is an API for SLAs. And I thought, I think you got that backwards. Isn't a contract an SLA for, let's say, something like an API? But maybe I'm missing the point here. But you wrote the book on it. So love to hear your perspective.
I think what happens again and again, I see a lot of people quite often when we talk about these new data practices. So, for example, data mesh. You read Zhamak's book, and it spends a lot of time talking about teams and how teams should operate and how teams should create data and share data. And it does mention technology, right? It mentions, oh, you might, use Spark on this team to process the data to prepare it to share with other teams. But what tends to happen with technologists get hold of a concept is they want to turn it strictly into a technology idea. So say data contracts, for example. It's a great idea to have an API that essentially enforces agreements between teams and monitors agreements and makes sure that the data is in the right shape. But if we only focus on that technological aspect, we completely lose the business, which I think is your point.
It is my point. If the business is not involved and not engaged and doesn't understand,
right,
then you're not going to get, put it this way, you're not going to get the funding and support and engagement that you need to do the things you want to do with data. And we spend an inordinate amount of time as an area of business debating amongst ourselves about terminology, about metaphors, about the way to, even something like, okay, no, I draw it as a circle. No, I draw it as a square. No, it should be a triangle. No, it should be 5 points, and I've got pillars. No, I've got layers. No, and we spend an inordinate amount of time on this while the rest of the business is waiting for us to deliver the value we keep promising. And, I overgeneralize for dramatic effect here, but I think this theme and this tone is throughout a lot of the work that a lot of people do, and it supports one of my basic theses, which is one of the biggest things holding back the data community is the way we talk about it.
Yeah, and our inability to communicate with the business side of things. Like we actually have gotten very good at communicating. The technicians can communicate with each other very well. There's a lot of, active discussion on LinkedIn and on shows like this about technology concepts, but then somehow that's not, we're not speaking a language that the business understands in many cases.
If you want to confuse your CEO, go in there and say, we need data contracts to monetize our data products. And I don't know if there's a word in there that they won't misinterpret. Contracts means, agreements between parties. Monetize means money. And we know that monetize in a data context doesn't always mean money. It means some form of value. And product isn't something that we always, product in the mind of the business is something that the business sells.
Yeah.
And when we say data products, we don't always mean something that can sell, will sell. It's just, again, you can hear the frustration in my voice. Why must we do this? Why can't we speak in clearer terminology to the business side instead of hyping and overhyping some of its terminology? To what end? I'm not sure what the true beneficial end is for the entire enterprise. We all agree. I think 100% of the people listening, certainly, and 100% of the people in the data business believe that data brings value to the business. And then after that statement, we all fall apart. Like how to describe it, what it is, where it is, what is value, what is data, what's the bit. We go through all these different machinations around the terminology, which is a unique kind of thing, I think, as a phenomenon, because we all do agree at this basic high level premise, which is what we do in data will bring value to the world that we work in.
Yeah, I think one concept I really like, but I think is kind of abused as well, is this idea of being data driven. And the reality is the vast majority of businesses now in operation in 2023 are data driven in the sense that they keep track of customer transactions as data. They're not on old ledgers and paper somewhere. They keep track of customer orders. They keep track of inventory, like everything that makes the business run is data somehow. The problem that businesses get into is not being data driven, it's being data competent. In other words, okay, you have all this data, but how well are you using it? How well are you using it to go above and beyond just those basic transactions to actually have analytics and insights? And a lot of the data competence, some of it is technical, but so much of it is just about communications across different silos within the company between the technical side and the business side, and saying, we have these analytics. What are we as a business going to do with them to improve our business operations?
Yeah, yeah. And I think part of the problem is kind of the order in which you said that. In a lot of cases, should be flipped around. We have these problems in the business. How can analytics help serve them? Versus creating this thing that you might think is really valuable but doesn't have an application. It's half the models people do at least don't even get into production. There's all kinds of testing and work. And for me, I mean, I'm not a technical person. I never actually worked with data. That's my not very well kept secret. I talk about how people talk about it, always being a storyteller, since storytelling was 2 words. So I go way back. But the idea is there are plenty of problems in every business that data can help solve. You don't have to go far. I like to say trying to find use cases for the application of something like master data in a business is as difficult as finding grains of sand on a beach. They're everywhere. It's everywhere. And I feel like the more successful organizations really kind of know that and don't get too overtaken with this. Are we data driven yet? How fast are we data driving? Are we data inspired? Or are we data led? Are we data literate? I don't know. At a certain point, you got to take a step back and listen to the other parts of your company and go, do marketing people talk this way? Do the salespeople talk this way? Do finance? We need to be finance literate. I just have this image in my head of the rest of the organization just sitting there and go, they're the data nuts again, going off, telling us we have to change our culture and do all these other things. And meanwhile, they're not delivering. We can't get the quarterly reports. My hierarchies don't work. We still have duplicates.
Yeah.
I look for one of my top categories and it says undefined.
It's always undefined.
Null. Yeah. What's
exactly.
Our biggest customer lately is null. Really, really, really basic stuff. So we start to listen to and try to create, I think, a little more. Our hype eyes are bigger than our execution stomachs sometimes, to bend a well-used metaphor.
Yeah. So Adi Polak has a good question here.
Oh, okay. Cool. Let me put on my real glasses.
Okay. So yeah, what would be clear terminology? Can you give an example? So we're talking about some really unclear terminology where it's either used just to talk about technology and so the business doesn't understand it, or maybe it's even been co-opted and distorted to some extent and it no longer means what it originally meant. So yeah, what would be clear terminology?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I think the basic vocabulary that we use should be based on the vocabulary of whatever that business is. So my summary for every business is that we're all trying to deliver value to our relationships through our brands at scale. That's a generic term on purpose that I tried to form or statement to make it extensible to every kind of business, but dig down below that and say, okay, what's the terminology for your business that works? Is it customers? What are those relationships, for instance? Customer, vendor, partner, prospect. That basic kind of business glossary terminology is where you want to start on clear, clean terminology for your organization. And those tend to be, product, service, offering. Those are the brand part of it. How do you deliver value? Is it helping the business grow? Is it helping it improve? Is it helping it mitigate risk? Is it helping it with ESG initiatives to sustain? These are really foundational things in my view that are relevant to every type of business. And I don't think you need to add the technical speak to it until you get to how it gets done. And that's my determining kind of dividing line there. Why you're doing it, deliver value to relationships with your brands at scale, versus how you're getting it done. Okay, we're using an analytics graph hub fabric mesh on our on-off super cloud premise. whatever. Those you want to separate that kind of nomenclature and terminology when you're talking to the business. So again, an example is, all right, customers. We have the customer, we have customer hierarchy, we have customer categories, we have customer geographies, we have customer identifiers. These are simple terms. Making sure that they are clear and understood and standardized across the organization is, in a lot of cases, the role of, or driven by, to use your other, driven by the data department, because they're trying to create and maintain a customer master file or a customer core data file. And that terminology needs to be understood and agreed to across the enterprise.
So suppose I'm a data practitioner, suppose I'm some kind of like data team lead or something like this. How do you think we should start the process so that the business gives us some kind of terminology and definition and things they say they've defined for me what a customer is, and they've defined some marketing metrics for me. How do I translate that into the technical side of things without losing something in translation going in that direction from the business to the technology side?
I don't know how you translate it too far into the technical side, since I try to stay away from that. But,
Okay,
I stay at like
fair enough.
I stay at that. If you think conceptual, logical, physical, I stay at kind of the conceptual side. Sometimes even the symbolic side. Mm-hmm. But the intention of even your question is, let's start with the business. Let's mm-hmm. start with what we do. And you guys, there was a great quote, sort of layered reference. Let me find it on here. Sorry. That I think, shows how you and me and Joe kind of share the same view in a lot of cases of data and its place in an organization, and where the focus needs to be, especially with data practitioners, which is around the business. So, my advice in all of these kinds of discussions I have with people, when they say, well, what advice would you give to the data side? Learn your business. Mm-hmm. Learn your business, what your business does. Not passively in terms of, not taking part, but learn it before you ask too many questions. There's the existence there. You don't start a lecture with a professor and say, I got 5 questions here. You let them explain their ideas and premise and concepts to you. Your business already exists. Assuming you've got a good, healthy, solid enterprise business, what does it do? What kind of products and services do you provide? How do your customers get value out of it? How is it distributed? Which I think is a great opportunity to find places for data to improve things, because the more complicated that go to market, the more complicated it is in your process to get what you make to the people who get value out of it, the more data opportunities there are in a lot of cases. Multi-tier, distributor-based, tangible goods businesses don't have the same kind of digitization opportunities as, a native web-born app-based business that's pure data. So but I find actually that the former to be even more exciting on finding data opportunities, because, I'll make up an example here, but here's a 100-year-old widget business. They've been distributing in 20 countries forever. They just bought another widget business. They've got to make their widgets from a whole bunch of materials. That's got to get more efficient in terms of supply chain. They got to ship them and deliver them through a multi-tier kind of process where multiple parties take physical ownership of that widget to get it through a warehouse, through a distribution center, to a store, let's say, on a shelf, to a customer. I love all that stuff. And the more complicated that is, the more data opportunities I think there are in a business, because you've got to find ways to get more efficient. You've got to find ways to target more customers, and you're still, anchored. It probably has the wrong connotation, but you're still wedded to this idea that, look, you make a tangible good. You make a bottle or a can or a box or a tube or a bag of something, and it's got to get to somebody. You can't digitize a sandwich or a bottle of soda. So your product still remains, this physical entity, yet data can help it get to there's a lot of ways data can help that product be more successful.
Yeah, and I mean, in my experience, I've seen some very concrete examples of this. So a few years back, I worked with a company that basically distributed food, and they were struggling with some very basic issues where, for example, they had trouble keeping current inventory. And so sometimes they would get a bunch of orders, and then if the inventory system was out of date, they'd have to call back the customer like in 6 hours and say, "Oh, sorry, we didn't actually have that item that we sold you." And so tying, physical goods businesses might seem very old school, unsexy, and yet they're very, very tied into these questions of data, where if you can't do really basic things with data, you're not going to be able to deliver the physical goods either, and people are going to be unhappy. Whereas if you have even marginally better analytics, it actually really improves your ability to give the customer what they want.
Yeah. And that's where I grew up too. So I grew up learned the data business when I was at Nielsen. I was a part of a company that became part of Nielsen, but Nielsen, steeped in the packaged goods world. Yeah. Nielsen scanner side, then expanded my role where I was working with a bunch of the folks on the media side. But again, these are all really like core. Again, I don't want to use legacy as a negative term. These are foundational types of businesses that Nielsen serve that have really broad reach, that every household eats. No matter what, everybody's got to eat. So they all go to supermarkets. So that's, and there's probably nothing more complicated on earth than the back room of a supermarket. If you haven't been in one, in terms of multiple parties and products and services and things happening and physical nature of it, it's a really, really, really complicated place that has sopped up a lot of data to make that location work better, just as a symbol, right? So it's just there's a symbolic notion of how data works. Take a look at what a supermarket, the operations and the efficiencies and the assortment in a supermarket today versus 10 years ago versus 20 years ago versus 50 years ago. So that stuff, especially those kinds of businesses, really fascinate me because they're really complicated. And again, the more complicated it is, the more data can help.
Well, I'm going to put another comment up here on the screen from James Frere. So data is the idea of accounting expanded to all parts of the business because of modern technology. And that's essentially it when we talk about data. And so now, instead of say 100 years ago, a supermarket, you estimate how much you want to order. You get your order back. Hopefully it's roughly what you ordered. You make sure you paid for the right stuff, but you don't know exactly what's on your shelves. You try to emphasize, selling items before they expire, but that's about the best you can do. Whereas now, if your data practice is up to snuff, you can keep track of everything. You know exactly what you're selling your customers and exactly what they're ordering. And that's where the opportunity is.
Yeah. This notion of account, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, back when I started in data, we were talking to CFOs. If there was a VP of technology worked with this in the CFO, for the CFO, but finance is where, because those were numbers, right? You needed a customer list, you needed a shipping list. I mean, that's where it all came together. That's where they had to tie together all these different activities. And it's where data absolutely, I love that, data absolutely started there. The customer master running the numbers, the chart of accounts, as people used to call it, probably still do. That all came from the finance side, keeping track of things and then being able to do electronically. And then, it's spreading the power and value of having that content spread, unofficial history of the data business here, just kind of spontaneously, spread to the marketing side, spread to the sales side, spread to, all these different other parts of the organization. You need more technology to handle it. So the IT department grew, CIO came along, now we're finally at a point where data is rising up to that C level personified by the CDO. If the CDO does report to the CEO, it's a real statement for an organization that they're committed to leveraging that content separate from technology for the organization. And I think that separation that's happening, and it's been happening over the last probably 5 years in terms of, with the rise of the CDO, is extremely healthy for the opportunities that we're all going after.
Yeah, completely agree. And I want to rewind just a second. Well, it's actually tied into what you just said just now. So a few months back, I wrote we called them rants back when we had a newsletter we'd send out every week. And I wrote a rant about, how do we, if you're confronting this changing economy, we're still wondering how it's changing, but it seems very uncertain right now. What should you be thinking about as a data person? And one of the things we talked about in that article was go learn how your business makes money. And it's kind of shocking how often data people aren't able to answer that question. And I've been guilty of that, I have to admit, right? But go learn, like, what is the marketing department doing? What does the warehouse do? How are physical goods shipped? Where do you source your goods? What's your supply chain? Like, why do customers come to your business as opposed to going to some other business to buy things? Understand those basic issues, and that can really motivate your work as a data person. And it also just facilitates communication with the business side to actually find value in the stuff you're doing.
Oh yeah, and they will appreciate the fact that you learn the business.
Yeah,
that you speak the language. I mean, when I worked at Nielsen, well, that was part of the technique we had. When you go into, you worked in the food business too. That they're all, we mentioned, they all get distributed differently. But there were simple things like when you talk to a food manufacturer, you didn't. The word customer meant retailer, and the word consumer means the end user. And if you mix those up, if you walked into a food manufacturer, you started talking about customers and you meant the shopper, they just knew, like, why is this person even in my office? They don't even know the basic terminology. You zoom in on that if you're working at an organization. Absolutely learn your business. You can, the advice I gave my children who are all out in business now was you cannot learn too much about the business that you're working in. It's impossible. You can't learn too much. There's always something to find out. And it will, on that collaborative cultural aspect of the data world, it will, I think, deepen that connection you've got with those business stakeholders, because you've taken the time to understand what they do and what your organization does before you launch into, we're going to use SQL or NoSQL or MySQL or LowSQL, whatever the heck it is. It's just mind numbing for the business side to really care about that. But learn the business. That's why you're in business. It's why you have a job. So those things are really, really important to keep in mind. Yeah, I picked that up. There was somebody, I told you about this in the pre-discussion here. I saw this great post from Bruno Aziza, who was referencing Tony Baer, who is apparently drawing on your perspective. Is that enough layers there to get to, but that in your book, which I haven't read yet, but I'll talk about why later. Data engineers should not simply be engineers, but to consider themselves in the data business, specifically knowing the customers, knowing the requirements, knowing the core business of the enterprise. I don't know if that's an exact quote or not, but it's wonderful. This goes far beyond worrying about feeds and speeds and the tool chain. And, whether you said that or Tony sort of paraphrased it or whatever it is, that concept, I think, is, drives a lot of the stuff both of us do. And kind of puts a spotlight on. Part of me goes, while that's on target, why do we have to remind people of that so much?
Yeah, it's an interesting question.
Why do we have to keep, why is that breakthrough thinking, not to devalue any of it from your side? Oh, look who's up. Speaking of breakthrough thinking, good morning, baby. Happy. Is it Valentine's Day where you are?
Yeah, I'm in Bangkok right now. I just the jet lag hit me when I talked to Matt. I was like, I don't think I'm gonna make it. I'm too tired. But jet lag works in weird ways. Now I'm up.
But the show must go on. What time is it?
Show must go on. You look like you're in vacation mode too.
I'm definitely in vacation mode. I'm trying to keep this mode going for the whole year.
Good job.
That's a smart idea. Yes.
What time? What day is it there? Is it Valentine's Day there?
It's Monday night. It's like almost Valentine's Day. Yeah, it's about 11:30 p.m. Where are you at?
I'm in Florida. Haven't you been watching? You don't watch Matt's show?
Matt's show's pretty good. I heard a lot about it. Yeah. morning Matt show.
Did the whole preamble.
That's right.
Awesome. Good to see you.
I was just quoting Bruno, who quoted Tony, who quoted you. So you can play that back later to find that
Sounds good.
Multi-layer convoluted reference.
It's very meta. I'll let you guys,
meta.
carry on. I'll get caught up in the conversation in a second. Here, go for it.
Okay. Well, good to see you. Glad you could make it.
Yeah, but to what you're saying, Scott, about like engineers needing to be tied to value, if you look at the history and roots of engineering, it's things like structural engineering and civil engineering and these disciplines that were very focused on like delivering concrete results. And I think the problem is that you get with technology now, things can get so powerful and so abstracted that it is easier for people who write code and people who do data science and statistics to sort of remove themselves from that practical aspect of engineering. And it really is time for us to plug back in to what the business is doing and what the world is doing. And that it's interesting too, going back to the question of communication, you're talking a lot about the need for engineers to listen to the business side, but also once you open those conversations, much more communication happens in both directions. And quite often what we see is that once you break down some of those silos, yes, the engineers will hear more what the business needs, but also they'll have suggestions like, hey, have you guys thought of this? We have all this data sitting here. What could we do with this as a business? You know, what opportunity is here that we're not exploiting?
Yeah. And that's part of the point in terms of that due diligence you do personally on, okay, understanding the business. The intention of that is to then find opportunities for you to leverage your expertise. One exercise I do to try and give people a sense of like how wacky the data space goes is pretend, listen to other departments and imagine if other departments talk the way the data department talks. Again, we're always reminding each other that we must deliver value to the business. Do you think the legal department ever says, you know what our purpose is? Deliver value to the business. Or the marketing department goes, we've got it. This is it, gang. What we really have to do is deliver value to the business. It's just that I don't think that conversation happens. I don't think people in those parts of the organization have these big epiphanies where they go, sales is really here to deliver value to the business. Like, get out there and sell something.
Right.
What are you talking about?
Like it's literally a line on the P&L.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so, mom and apple pie, and just so, of course, nobody's going to disagree with it, but why is that something we have to spend too much time convincing each other of, when in fact it's the reason you exist?
Well, yeah, I mean, you've been around for a long time. I mean, I didn't quite mean it that way.
I go back pre-2K is when I started. Yes,
pre-2K, so 1800s. Yes. But back when Abraham Lincoln was doing data, but seriously though, back in the day, was it always like that, where people were saying, yeah, we need to deliver value? Because I mean, you've been so in context, I mean, you've been giving keynotes at data conferences for a really long time. I mean, you've seen messages kind of come and go. Has the kind of we deliver value and shouting from the rooftops, has that been a thing for a really long time?
No, it didn't start that way. That's a great point, because it's and by the way, as a footnote, I worked at the same data company that Abraham Lincoln did work at. That's not just a random reference you made. Abraham Lincoln worked at
It was actually a legal company. Yeah.
Yeah, he worked at Dun & Bradstreet. I worked at Dun & Bradstreet. We go way back, me and Abe. But he did Gettysburg Address verification for the Dun & Bradstreet company, so that was one of his roles. But no, it wasn't quite as when I started in the data business, it wasn't quite as injected with like the super hype energy that it has today, which has, it's a two-edged sword. It's probably sharper on the good part than the not good part, but it wasn't quite as intensely hyped, because it was, it tended to be rooted more in the basics, and when analytics was referred to more as market research, right? Because that's what it really was as a category. You spent a lot of time explaining to people why market research or this insight could help move a business forward, but it was at more of kind of, how to apply it. And there was less of a question of, as a concept, as a practice, is this going to be worth anything? It was, all right, is that type of market research going to fit our need, or what do we need to understand? And then, coming from that, when it all got digitized and there were systems and it was easy, you didn't have to do it siloed. And I mean, when I started the data business, sorry to ramble on here. When I started the data business, the company I worked at, the part of Nielsen I worked at, one of the objections we would get was that they didn't have a computer big enough to hold the data we were trying to license to them. So we got around that by saying, all right, we'll give you a computer where you can run this data and then, do some, print it out and go run across the, the hallway and explain it to somebody. So those were the kinds of things that people were dealing with, which were really restrictive in terms of the technology. So that whole transformation that's gone on in terms of, nobody would suggest that anymore, right? That, oh, I don't have enough room for the data you're talking about. Then led to, I think, a lot of this maybe a little bit overhyping along the way. But it didn't really start that way. No, it didn't start with, all right, what we must do it, in the data, with data to deliver value to the business. That's our, basic premise. It just didn't, we kind of skipped to that. It was sort of assumed that, all right, here's some new insight that can help, move a business forward. We spent a lot of time, and, I was a data vendor. I didn't work for the Nielsen that most people know. I worked for a subset of it that was more on the customer master maintenance side. That's how I got into master data. And there were plenty of people. I mean, I went through my own epiphanies in my own development in terms of learning how to talk about it, because I talk about it in my book, Telling Your Data Story. Big moment was sitting with this head of sales for an organization who I explained everything we could do, and he just sat back and he went, I don't understand any of this. All I got to do is, I need to be able to sell more stuff, and I don't understand how this helps me sell more stuff. And it was all my fault. There's a long drive back to the airport in terms of trying to fix the story, because I knew the goods were there. I knew the value was there, but we just weren't talking about it the right way. And that, if I retrofit my whole career, it was all about being able to create that story around what data can bring to an organization. So people go from, I have no idea what you're talking about, to, how do we live without this? We got to get this done. That comes from, storytelling. And so that's why I think, the kinds of things I do are different than the kinds of things you guys do. And, day to day, we've all got a place in this data space here, and we all try and play our role. And I try to play my position as well as possible, but I stick to my position and continue to reinforce the fact that if you want to explain something to somebody, you got to be able to tell a story.
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that the technology really has come a long way. It has changed dramatically. Yeah. So, for example, there's this notion of EDI, electronic data interchange.
Right, yeah,
and EDI is like emailing spreadsheets back and forth, and emailing PDFs and emailing CSV files. And this still goes on a lot, right? But we have much better tools in general now. But if you're not focused on the underlying purpose of that data, it doesn't matter how good your interconnection tools are and how good you are at maintaining the consistency of the data and how streamlined and automated things are. The data simply won't get used. And so the point should be, let's take these really great tools and actually deploy them in a way that's useful. And no matter how sharp your size, if the business doesn't know how to use it, they're just simply not going to care and going to ignore you.
Yeah. Good analogy. I'm just smiling because I haven't heard EDI for a while. That TLA.
Oh, it's still around. It's still all over the place. I'm sorry to say, but
is there reverse EDI now? Do we do that?
Or EID?
EID.
But
there were always TLAs, as we call them, right? There were always those in the data space, no matter what.
That's pretty funny. I mean, that is an interesting point, though. I think my first Substack article was an article called Groundhog Days, where I talked about some of the things I had seen recurring over, the time I've been in data, which dates back to late 90s, early 2000s or whatever. And so, but it was the same questions over and over. Like, do I believe the data? And if I do I get value from it, right? Whatever the hell value means. I define value as that which, the end customer deems valuable and wants to pay you for in the day. It's about as good of a definition as I've seen. But it seems like as long as I've been in the field, we've been struggling with those two things. Like, do I trust the data? It doesn't give me, value or joy or whatever. It's interesting because I don't feel like we're any closer to the mark. We have fancier tools, but in a lot of ways, I feel like it helps us do dumb things more quickly. in some ways if there isn't a clear objective behind like what we're trying to do. And so and recently too, I feel like the last 10 years, especially with the you know democratization of data, so to speak, or I guess the popularity of data science and modern data stack and other trends, which I think is great in some ways, but I think along the way a lot of data professionals got into data because it was a cool thing to do, not because it solved problems. When I got into data, it was because I had a math degree and I didn't know what to do, besides go be an actuary, go teach math, go work for the government, or go like wait tables or something, right? Which is what you do with a math degree back in the day. Matt chose academia, I chose evil. That's how it is. So, but back
I came
then,
around eventually, Joe. I came around. So.
You joined the dark side. Good for you.
I got
back in the day, it wasn't
data
about,
from the sales and marketing side. That's how I got it today.
right.
Which
Yeah.
working
But-
for
but-
working
but
for a
back then-
data company, yeah, that didn't have a good story. I mean, literally, it was when I first day of my job at this company that then became part of Nielsen. The sales manager comes in and she's got a book that's this thick, and it's this was pre-PowerPoint. So, they used to print out all the slides and acetates and put them on an overhead projector, going way back. And she had this big, thick book, and she said, let me take you through the pitch. And my initial reaction before she even turned the cover was, that's way too long. Whatever it is, it's way too long. And it was just like, and then this, and then this, and this is what you got to, it's like, they're paying me to sit through this, and I can't sit through this. I can imagine somebody who, we're looking for commitments from, who's going to sit through this, whatever this monstrosity of an epic story is. How do you get to that point? And my value I brought to that organization was branding their deliverable in a way that you could explain it very quickly to people who, at a cocktail party, at a, whatever that concept was, and you could go deeper from there. But how do you make these concepts really succinct and ring and speak to leadership where they go, oh, okay, all right, tell me more. You want them to say, tell me more. You don't want to start with the whole Megillah. And that takes technique, that takes practice. That's what storytelling is all about. Doesn't matter what part of it.
Sure.
What you do for
Actually,
it.
Jess Haberman has a really good question
Yeah,
here. What's up,
put
Jess?
this up.
Okay.
Yeah. She asks, how do you define data storytelling? She says, I see it used in a lot of different ways, from data visualization strategies to how you communicate about your data role in an org, how you communicate data insights. Curious about Scott's definition here. And she says she also needs to read your book clearly. And
excellent, Jess. I will
send
send you a discount code for 20% off on it for the book, Telling Your Data Storytelling for Data Management, 99% buzzword free. So great question. I looked at data storytelling, and it was, still one of the hottest things going on, non-technical things I would suggest in the data space. And in my usual way, with my usual angle, I looked at data storytelling and realized it was all about analytics. It was all about putting, insight, metrics, analysis into some form of narrative that explained the value to drive some form of business purpose. Just kind of trying to summarize it there. And I looked at it and went, okay, again, that's more analytic storytelling, the kind of common view of it. We're not going to rename it here, and it's not going to get renamed. It's still called data storytelling. But if you look at the 30 books out there on data storytelling that aren't mine, they are all about analytics. So my definition was there needs to be a second type of data storytelling for data management. We spend a lot of time telling stories with data. We need to tell stories about the data in our organization, why it's important to manage it at an enterprise level, why having that basic foundational data management is critical to every type of organization. And so I kind of created a subgroup of data storytelling about data management. And so my definition of data storytelling, my view on it is that narrative you use to get the engagement and support from the business side to continue to do the data management work that's critical for everything that has to do with technology. So two kinds of data storytelling out there, one for analytics, one for data management, one's with data, one's about data, one is, as I would call it, deriving meaning, which is analytics, and the other one is determining the truth, which is data management. So I've got a whole litany of comparisons of the two kinds of data storytelling. And one of the points I continually make is you don't have to choose. Every organization needs both. It's not selfish choice here. It's like, let's pick one or the other. You need both. And no matter what, to be successful in an organization broadly, I believe you need to be able to tell stories, whether they're about data or about whatever you do.
Well, and to me, there's a bigger idea here, Scott, which is, and I think you're already alluding to this, which is why should you care about data at all? Not just data management, but like why does this even matter? Why are we worrying about this at all? If you can tell that story to the business, then they're going to be much more motivated to like support your team and pay very expensive salaries and such.
That's the story they want. That's the story they want to hear. And part of what we end up doing, the big we, is we focus on how it gets done, because we're so enamored with the work we're doing technically and our experience and discovery of a new technique, technology, stack orientation, whatever you want to call it. And it can be very exciting, I'm sure, for those practitioners out there, but your CEO could care less. They don't care about how it gets done until they understand why. And you don't, if you have 5 minutes with your CEO, and I have spent, and I'm proud to say, I've spent, more than my share of time in front of senior leadership, both in the organizations I've worked in, which were global organizations, dealing with the highest levels there, explaining, helping them tell better stories about what we did from a data management perspective, as well as engaging with top level folks on the enterprise side. They don't want to hear how you get it done. They want to hear why it's important. And once they begin to show an interest in how you do it, then you need to realize you're being successful in explaining why it's important. Because they don't care how until they understand why.
Well, and then to bring it back to like, I'll call it the culture of technology that we've seen over the last 2 decades. In the quote unquote big data era, there was just this obsession with technology. And some companies were very successful with Hadoop, but many were not, because they actually didn't have a story about why they were even spending all this money building a very complex stack.
Well, but in a lot of cases, I saw executives wanting to do big data right back in the day, because it was like the cool, if you could do that, then you got brownie points, with your friends. Sorry, I cut you off, Matt.
Totally fine. No, you're extending the thought here.
Well, but the same thing with AI, right? Yeah, that's the current, right? That's the current big data thing. I mean, you bring up a point where you're talking about when did things get really hypey? I think big data was a definite milestone in development here, in the chronology of that, the concept of what data might be able to bring to an organization getting spread across different departments in a way and getting recognized. So when big data came out as a term, I immediately was like, all right, what does this mean? How does this work? All right, you need small data, which is master data. And everybody got kind of cute with how many V's they could list and all that kind of stuff. But a positive aspect of it is that messaging did begin to get the concept of data and data value in one way or the other into conversations and parts of an organization that it hadn't permeated before. And not saying it was always positive, not saying it was all, and again, to your point there, Joe, a lot of people went off and said, we need big data. I just came back from some conference and my CEO went, we got to have big data, whatever that means. Just like now, you can't turn on the TV without hearing about it. Everybody needs AI.
It was interesting because the big data discussions, like, I think a lot of executives took it literally. Like, I remember discussions about, well, how much data do you have, right? And back then it was laughably low because everyone was in kind of the gigs or maybe lower terabyte. You look at it now and it's like your phone has more storage than a lot of this big data back then. But those are the conversations. It wasn't about like, what are you doing with it? And so that was one aspect of it. The other one, I think, was the rise of data science, which just blew the door open for data practitioners. And that's that people started talking about data as a practice and trying to, and it was data first versus back when I got into data. I always kind of make comparison. You remember Office Space, the movie? And there was that character Milton who had the red stapler, who they shoved into the basement because they didn't know what to do with him. I can't recall if he was actually on the payroll or not. I don't think he was. Anyway, he showed up to work. But that was like a lot of the data people back in the day. And when I got into it, it was like it wasn't this cool thing. You were there just to do a job, just like everybody else, and it wasn't called data whatever. It was just it was a function. It was a role. So my
it wasn't the
background was
sexiest
just by
job.
changing.
Right.
No, but it was like it was. No, I could think of far sexier jobs than that for sure. But then data science became the sexiest job of the 21st century, and then everyone wanted to get into data. And it was for me, it was weird watching this because I was like, what happened? Like you're literally doing the same stuff that we used to do, but now you're getting paid a ton more money, get a ton more attention, you get kind of the VIP treatment. This was like circa early to mid 2010s, and then I think what I started to notice, and Matt started to notice the same thing, was I think for us the kind of the hype fell out of the it started fading off. I think we started noticing like it's cool, but it's really hard to do like all this data science stuff if you haven't built a good foundation, if you don't have good data, the truth, right, and all these other ingredients which you've been talking about for a long time. So I mean, there's certain immutables. I think certain like laws of physics that just apply to data. And Matt, feel free to push off. You are actually a physicist in mathematician, so it's interesting.
Well, the point is, rewinding just a bit, that this really did bring attention to the data space, right? Like people got very excited about what Google was doing and what Amazon was doing with data. And when technical people get an audience with the CEO, and you alluded to this, Scott, they really need to make good use of it. They need to have a good story to tell to explain why what they're doing matters. Because it is mutually beneficial. That helps the technical side to have jobs, and it really will help the business if you come up with the right story and actually execute on that story on delivering practical value.
I mean, back to my sort of statement about delivering value to relationships through your brands at scale, understanding the strategic intention of your enterprise. These are things that every organization has and that every data person needs to understand. And there's a whole lot of data about relationships you've got, and your leadership already understands relationships. They understand that they want better relationships. They want to grow relationships, improve relationships, protect relationships, sustain relationships. And so focus on that. A lot of it is, again, a form of storytelling. How do you position the things you have to make people realize it's something that will bring them benefit? I mean, it is selling. The data story, back to, I think it was Jess who asked that question. The data story you need to tell, the type of data story you need to tell an organization about data management, at least, is a pitch. You got to be able to pitch it. And if you don't have background in pure sales, learn some of those techniques. I sort of lean heavily on that background in terms of sales and marketing. But it is, how do you convince somebody of the benefits of what you have to offer? And how do you get them to say yes? These are, age-old techniques that didn't start with data, but certainly if you're in the data space, you can benefit from them.
You can benefit a lot, actually. Believe it or not, I actually spend, I wouldn't say, I spend a bit of my time reading books on negotiation, sales, marketing. For one, I'm just fascinated by it. I think, too, data's, I would say, up there with one of the hardest things to sell. Right?
Yeah.
Something that's fuzzy. It's not like selling a crane or a car or something that you can, or a laptop or something, right? It's almost like selling religion.
It is, or even selling software. I mean, let's be the same. It's easier to sell software than it is to sell data in a lot of cases because there's not always anything to demo. So I was always jealous of software salespeople because they had something to demo. We didn't have any.
Right.
People would ask us, okay, does your and we'd spend the first. I've always been in the data business from the supplier side, and actually always from a data content provider side. So if it's Dun & Bradstreet, if it's Nielsen, if it's Kantar, these, in my case, some really iconic world-class brands that produce data content, not the technology always. You know, they had systems to be able to manage it, but our most sophisticated clients and wherever I was, what they wanted was the data as kind of as raw as possible, not totally raw what we collected, but somehow processed, but in their case, kind of as pure as possible that they could embed and put into their own systems and their own tools. You know, how do I integrate this with another set of data I have, which is when I started to learn that nobody uses any single source of data alone. The more, you know, you've heard me talk about, you know, the more columns you can add to those rows, the more, you know, theoretically, the more value you get. And that's different than software. Software you can see, right? You can see it and you can watch it do stuff and it does magic in front of you and you do a demo. But data itself absolutely is, you feel it more than you see it, and you feel bad data a lot.
Well, and in a lot of cases, is bad data too. You know, Matt and I always say that data is a silent killer because you may not know it's bad or wrong for a long, long time, and you've been making decisions off of this. You know, so if you know, so it ends up being an interesting. You end up getting some pretty interesting outcomes sometimes, for better or for worse. So.
Well, good decisions you make off of bad data are just bad decisions you don't know about yet. My most quoted quote. But that's, you know, what you got to let people know. You gotta remind people of those kinds of things. And then it all goes back to, you know, if your inputs are good, your outputs are going to be better. I just, you know, wish there was another way. All I do is try and figure out different ways to say that. But I'm only saying one. I found it valuable for me, at least for my career, to just focus on a thing, an idea. And it's been certainly for me, part of the core of my success is just that focus around some singular notions, and then like jazz, riffing and improvising off of those, but always coming back to that same thing.
But you've hit on core nuggets, though, right? You hit on core nuggets of truth. No pun intended. You get a truth. Safari hat at some point.
Got my truth
hat. There you go.
Brought my truth hat, but I'm wearing the hat from the end.
No, but these are the immutables. Though I mean, this is like the bedrock upon which everything else is built, right? And if you don't have this, then you know. I mean, it's not like it's not like you set your hat on like, oh yeah, we need to, get truth about big data, right, or truth about data science or any of this stuff. It's like, I think you took it a step back, and that was pretty cool.
But where it starts, I'm fond of, reminding people. I talk about, and I live where data starts. Most of the activity and the experience that people have, certainly most, if not, I won't say all of the hype, but the big portion of the hype is where data ends up.
Yeah,
data science, analytics, visualization, all that kind of stuff. But you got to start somewhere, and if you start correctly, you're going to end up in a better place. You don't need a quote from Yogi Berra or Yoda to remind you of that. If you start right, you're going to end up in a better place, and it's hard. It's hard.
What was that quote again? Somebody was asking.
The most quoted quote. Yeah.
Just go to my website, metameta.com. You'll see it up there, metametaconsulting.com. Good decisions made on bad data are just bad decisions you don't know about yet.
Awesome. Truth bomb.
There you go. We'll sell you the t-shirt.
Cool. What's up for you in 2023? You doing some talks? What are you up to?
Doing some fun stuff here. Obviously on this, so I mentioned to Matt, we're in Florida now, just bopping around a little bit. But when I get back, I'm at the Informatica MDM event in New York City. I'm going to be helping them host a roundtable. Really excited to be working with that brand now. So I've been talking to them for a little bit, and that's fun.
So what dates will you be there?
That's March.
Scott, I'll have to say hi.
March 2nd in New York.
March 2nd.
Are you going to be in New York?
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I will on March 2nd, in fact. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. We'll
say hi somewhere.
Okay. I'll give you the details. I got accepted as part of the MIT CDO IQ conference, so I'll be speaking there. That's nice. I'm doing Big Data London in the fall, which I'm super excited about.
Cool.
And I've got another gig, which this is the kind of stuff I love. So anybody out there looking for this stuff, the Auto Care Association. Here's an association very specific to the auto aftermarket world. They've got a whole community of folks who create and manage content about auto parts, and there's a lot of complication in that world. They've got a standards conference, so I'll keynoting at that around reinforcing the power and value of setting those standards. And in that kind of audience, I'm not teaching anybody anything new about data, but I'm purely out there to just say, here's potentially a different way to talk about it. Because it's important, I know it's important, but the people who are not in this room don't realize it. And part of the reason they don't realize it is because they're not convinced yet. They're not hearing the right kind of story. So that I love that kind of stuff. And some other thing, I'm also working on, from a content perspective, I'm finally this is the year of the puppets for me. It's kind of like puppet or shut up, pop up or shut up. I haven't figured out how to get my own. But I've been I did those the puppets of data like 4 years ago now. It was pre-COVID, where I had that little data puppet show with my characters, the CDO, the chief dog officer, and the ITB, who speaks only in buzzwords, and business monkey. And I'm expanding this to an epic multi-part series. It's called, right now the working title is Journey to the Center of the Single Version of the Truth. And it will follow the CDO and the ITB in their epic quest to bring value from data to their organization. They hire a consultant from Kinsey. They talk to some analysts. One's from Gardner, one's from Frogister. I'm going to play on some things. They do some demos from Salesforce and Microspoon. But clearly there's a thematic approach to my approach to data. And they're going to wander around. They're going to invest. I'm telling you, part of my messaging is to just kind of show people the ridiculousness, or sometimes the parody or satire of what we're doing in the space, to make the point of, look, we got to focus on the real stuff. So they're going headlong into technology first. That's what they're going straight into. Forget all the things we've just talked about for the last 45 minutes. Let's focus on all this stuff that, as humans, we know are the wrong way to go. But as data puppet characters, they're going to go headlong into. And I think it'll be relevant and recognizable to a lot of folks out there. But I'm excited. I don't have the full script yet. I've got a ton of scraps and notes and little scenes. I did one scene already. I did tape one scene already. I'm going to have a whole bunch of guest voices in it. So if you know Caroline Carruthers and Peter Jackson of Carruthers and Jackson, I don't know if you follow them. They do a thing called Data Summer School. They're great folks out of the UK. And they have a program every summer called Data Summer School, which I'm also part of. So I'll be coming back for a third time on that. So I love doing that as a guest faculty in the Data Summer School. Those of you out there should definitely register to try and be part of Carruthers Jackson Data Summer School this year. But the scene I wrote for them is they play two characters who run a chief dog officer obedience school. And they give the dog character a shock collar. And one bit that happens is every time he says a buzzword, they press a little button. It's like, so they kind of trying to train him in the right way, using some unorthodox methods to focus on the right kind of thing. But I wrote it and early because they were going to be we were all in New York together in the fall, and we recorded it in person, and it was a blast. They were fantastic. So more to come on the Puppets of Data Journey to the Center of the Single Version of the Truth, coming to you probably in the fall. But I think that'll be my biggest creative commitment. I look at it as much work as the book was, but a lot more complicated.
Sure. It sounds like a lot of fun. And for the audience out there, don't put shock collars on your colleagues.
Do not, no.
Or do. I think depending where you
Maybe
work.
it works.
Yeah. no excessive devices there. Well, cool, man. Great having you on. Yeah, you become a regular guest on the I guess the Valentine's week.
Valentine's week. I think I've been in your
So-
show 4 times, right? I think it's my fourth on a variety of your shows.
Yeah.
I know, Joe, you've got
Yeah.
multiple shows, but always delighted to be on here. Always happy to talk to you guys. It's a blast, and I think we see the world in similar ways from different angles, and that's
Yeah.
part of why I think we
Well,
became
guess
fast
what? It
friends
is
over
Valentine's
this.
Day here. It
Oh,
turned,
happy
it's
Valentine's!
Just
midnight now, so it's
Happy
Valentine's Day in
Valentine's Day.
Thailand. Yes. Mwah. Yeah, it's awesome. So next week, Matt and I need to figure out what the show is going to be. I'm not sure if I'm going to be on a remote island off of Myanmar or not. In which case there will be no Wi-Fi. In which case I guess we need to think of something. But the following week after that, I think it's who do we have here? Got actually a whole stacked roster of people. Celine's gonna be on, and then after that, Roger Workshall is gonna be on actually on my birthday, and so it's gonna be some good shows. I'm going to be traveling a ton, giving talks as well, so stay tuned for a lot of that. But I think I'm out of the country like pretty much every month now. So how the cookie crumbles, or the pad thai crumbles, I guess as I would say here. So cool, Scott.
Cool.
Let me get some sun out there, man. It looks nice.
Yeah, going out
It's really
now.
dark here right now. So
That's
yeah.
it. No, it's a beautiful day here in Florida.
Cool.
And but happy to spend this time in morning with you guys and the folks listening.
Thanks for taking the time, man.
As always,
As always.
thanks for always having me. Always happy to talk.
Anytime, dude. All right. Take it easy. All right, see you guys. Bye.
Take care.